Helena Martinez thought she had won the life of her dreams by marrying the powerful Roberto Alcantara. But when a locked door revealed a dark secret, her life turned into a nightmare. Who was her husband, really? And how far would he go to keep the truth hidden? Before we dive into this shocking story, comment below where in the world you're watching from. The morning sun streamed through the curtains of the penthouse suite at the Alcantara Hotel. Helena Martinez woke up surrounded by silk sheets and the scent of fresh roses. For a moment, she thought she was dreaming. Just 6 months ago, she had been working as a waitress, struggling to pay rent for her tiny apartment in the poor side of town. Now, she was Mrs. Helena Alcantara, wife of Roberto Alcantara, one of the richest men in the country. She glanced at the empty space beside her. Roberto was an early riser, always up before dawn to check the stock market. At 78, he had more energy than men half his age. Helena slipped into a silk robe and walked to the balcony. The city sprawled beneath her, a view she was still getting used to. Her phone buzzed with a text from her best friend, Lucia. "How's life? With the dinosaur? Gold digger life treating you well?" Helena frowned and put the phone down without answering. Nobody understood. They all thought she married Roberto for his money, but they didn't know how kind he had been to her, how he treated her with respect when no one else did. "Good morning, my dear." Roberto's voice came from behind her. He was dressed in an expensive suit, his silver hair perfectly combed. Despite his age, he was still handsome, with sharp blue eyes that seemed to see right through her. "You look beautiful this morning," he said, kissing her forehead gently. Helena smiled. "You're leaving already?" "Just a quick meeting downtown. Then I'm all yours for lunch. I want to show you something special today." After Roberto left, Helena wandered through the massive penthouse. They had been married for only a week, and she still felt like a visitor in this luxurious world. The wedding had been a lavish affair, with hundreds of guests, most of them Roberto's business associates and a few celebrities. The newspapers had a field day, splashing photos of them everywhere with headlines like "Beauty and the Aged Beast" and "Magnate's May-December Romance." Her phone rang. It was her mother, Maria. "Helena, I saw the photos in the society pages." "You looked beautiful, honey." "Thanks, Mom," Helena said, feeling a knot in her stomach. Her mother had been suspicious of Roberto from the start. "Are you happy?" Maria asked, her voice tinged with concern. "Yes, I am. Roberto is good to me." "That's all that matters then. But remember, if you ever need to come home..." "I know, Mom. I have to go. Roberto will be home for lunch soon." After hanging up, Helena decided to explore more of the penthouse. Roberto had given her a tour when they first moved in, but there were still rooms she hadn't properly seen. On the 3rd floor, she found a door that was locked. Strange, she thought. Roberto hadn't mentioned this room. When Roberto returned for lunch they ate on the terrace, he seemed distracted, checking his phone frequently. "Is everything okay?" Helena asked. "Just business, my dear. My son is causing problems again." Helena nodded. Roberto's son, Carlos, had made it clear he despised her. At 55, he was more than twice her age and he hadn't even attended the wedding. "He thinks you're after my money," Roberto said with a sigh. "But I know better. You remind me of someone I once knew. Someone very special." There was something sad in his eyes when he said this, but before Helena could ask, he changed the way. "Subject, I have to go away on business for a couple of days. Will you be all right here alone?" "Of course," Helena said, though the thought of being alone in this massive place made her nervous. After Roberto left the next morning, Helena decided to satisfy her curiosity about the locked door. She remembered seeing a set of keys in Roberto's study. It took her nearly an hour to find them, hidden in a drawer of his antique desk. With the keys in hand, she made her way to the 3rd floor. Her heart was pounding as she tried several keys until one finally fit. The door swung open to reveal a room that made her blood run cold. The walls were covered with photographs of her. Helena as a child playing in a park, she vaguely remembered. Helena as a teenager at her high school graduation. Helena working at the cafe where she'd first met Roberto. Some of the photos were taken from a distance, as if someone had been following her for years. In the center of the room was a mahogany desk with a box full of letters, all addressed to her but never sent. With trembling hands, she opened one. "My dearest Helena," it began, "another year has passed and I still haven't found the courage to tell you the truth. I watch you grow from afar, and my heart breaks, knowing that you don't know who I really am." Helena felt sick. The letter was dated 10 years ago. She opened another and another, each one revealing a man obsessed with her long before they'd supposedly met by chance at the cafe. Then she saw a framed photo on the desk that made her stop breathing. It showed a young woman holding a baby. The woman was clearly her mother, Maria, looking younger and happier than Helena had ever seen her. And the man standing beside her, with his arm around her waist, was unmistakably a younger Roberto. Her mind raced. Could it be? No, it was impossible. Her mother had always told her that her father had died before she was born. But the dates, on the letters, the photographs spanning her entire life. Now you know. Helena whirled around to find Roberto standing in the doorway, his face ashen. She hadn't heard him come back. "What is this?" she whispered, her voice shaking. "Why do you have pictures of me as a child? How do you know my mother?" Roberto stepped into the room, closing the door behind him. "I was going to tell you. After we'd been married a while when the time was right." "Tell me what?" Helena demanded, though a part of her already knew the terrible truth. Roberto's blue eyes, so like her own, filled with tears. "I am your father, Helena." The world seemed to spin around her. Helena grabbed the edge of the desk to steady herself. "That's not possible," she said. "My mother told me my father died. Maria thought that was easier than the truth, that I abandoned you both." Roberto's voice was heavy with regret. "I was already married when I met your mother. It was a brief affair. When she told me she was pregnant, I panicked. My wife was from a powerful family and divorce wasn't an option, so I paid Maria to keep quiet and disappear." Helena felt like she might vomit. "But why? Why the marriage? Why this?" She gestured around the room of surveillance. "I never stopped thinking about you," Roberto said, taking a step toward her. "Over the years, I kept track of you from a distance. I hired people to take photos, to let me know how you were doing. My wife died 5 years ago, and I finally felt free to approach you. When I saw you working at that cafe, it seemed like fate. So you pretended to meet me by chance, made me fall in love with you, married me." Each word felt like acid in her mouth. "I never meant for it to go this far," Roberto said, reaching for her hand. "I just wanted to get to know you, to help you. But then we connected so deeply, and I confused my feelings. I've been alone for so long." Helena jerked away from his touch. "Don't, you're sick, this is sick." She backed toward the door, her whole body shaking. "I'm your daughter and you married me. Do you understand how twisted that is?" "Helena, please," Roberto begged. "Let me explain. I love you, but not like that, not anymore. I realized after the wedding that what I feel for you is a father's love. That's why we haven't." Helena suddenly realized why their marriage hadn't been consummated. Roberto had always claimed he wanted to take things slow, to build a deeper connection first. Now she understood the real reason. "I'm leaving," she said, her voice surprisingly steady despite the storm inside her. "You can't," Roberto said, his tone suddenly changing. "No one can know about this. Think of the scandal, what it would do to my company, to your mother." "I don't care about your company," Helena shouted. "You've been lying to me from the start. Our whole relationship is a lie." "If you leave, you'll get nothing," Roberto warned. "The prenup is very clear. You walk away with nothing unless we're married for at least a year." Helena laughed bitterly. "You think I want your money? I want nothing from you." She turned to leave, but Roberto grabbed her arm. "Helena, please, I need you to understand. I wanted to make things right, to give you the life you deserved, by marrying me, your own daughter." She wrenched her arm free. "You're not my father. A real father wouldn't do this." Just then, the door burst open. Carlos, Roberto's son, stood there with a shocked expression. Behind him was a woman Helena recognized as Roberto's secretary, looking equally stunned. "I knew she was a gold digger," Carlos said coldly, "but I never imagined this." "Carlos, this isn't what it looks like," Roberto started, but Carlos cut him off. "I heard everything, father. Everything." He turned to Helena, his disgust evident. "You should be ashamed of yourself." "Me?" Helena felt a flash of rage through her shock. I didn't know he was my father, Carlos scoffed. A likely story. What a convenient way to get your hands on the Alcantara fortune. Helena felt trapped, cornered by these men who seemed determined to paint her as the villain. She pushed past Carlos and ran down the stairs, tears blurring her vision. She made it to the bedroom and began throwing her clothes into a suitcase. Her whole body felt numb, moving on autopilot. How had her life turned into this nightmare? 1 week ago, she thought she had found happiness with a kind, older man who adored her. Now she discovered she had married her own father, a man who had been secretly watching her entire life. As she zipped up her suitcase, Roberto appeared in the doorway, looking suddenly frail and old. "Please don't go," he said quietly. "We can fix this. We can get an annulment quietly. No one has to know the truth. You can stay here as my daughter." Helena stared at him, this stranger who had turned her world upside down. "I already have a mother. I don't need a father who's been lying to me my entire life." She grabbed her suitcase and walked past him, but his next words stopped her cold. "Maria didn't tell you everything, Helena. There's more you need to know. About your mother. About why I really left." Helena hesitated, her curiosity battling with her desire to flee. What more secrets could there possibly be? "If you leave now," Roberto continued, sensing her hesitation, "you'll never know the whole truth. And believe me, there's much more to this story than you can imagine." From downstairs came the sound of the front door opening and voices. One of them Helena recognized immediately, her mother, Maria. What was she doing here? "Helena!" "Maria's," voice called out. "Helena, are you here? We need to talk." Roberto's face paled even further. "She wasn't supposed to come," he whispered. "Not yet." Helena looked from Roberto to the stairs, where she could hear her mother climbing up. The two people who had shaped her life, both apparently full of secrets. Who was telling the truth? Who could she trust? As her mother appeared at the top of the stairs, Helena felt like she was standing on the edge of a cliff, about to discover whether she would fly or fall into an even deeper abyss. "Mom?" Helena's voice cracked. "What's going on? Do you know who he really is?" Maria's eyes darted between Helena and Roberto, filled with a mixture of fear and resignation. "Yes," she finally said, "I know exactly who he is. But there's something you both need to know. Something I've kept secret for 23 years. Something you've kept secret." Helena looked at her mother in disbelief. "You told me my father was dead, and now I find out I married him. What else could you possibly be hiding?" Maria's face was pale, her hands trembling as she clutched her purse. "Can we sit down? This isn't a conversation we should have standing." In a hallway, Carlos appeared behind her, his face tight with anger. "I think we all deserve to hear whatever it is you have to say, Maria." The tension in the air was thick as they moved to the living room. Helena sat as far from Roberto as possible, while Maria perched on the edge of a chair, looking like she might bolt at any moment. "Start talking, Mum," Helena said coldly. "And no more lies." Maria took a deep breath. "Roberto isn't your biological father." The room fell silent. Helena felt like she'd been slapped. "What?" Roberto's voice was barely a whisper. "I lied to you both," Maria continued, unable to meet their eyes. "Roberto, when I told you I was pregnant, it was true. But the baby wasn't yours." "So who is my father?" Helena demanded, feeling like her entire identity was crumbling around. Maria twisted her hands in her lap. "His name was Antonio. He worked for Roberto as his driver." Carlos let out a harsh laugh. "Well, isn't this rich? The maid and the driver, having an affair right under father's nose." "I wasn't a maid," Maria snapped. "I was the house manager for the Alcantara estate. Antonio and I fell in love, but we kept it secret because Roberto had strict rules about employees dating." Roberto stood up, his face flushed with anger. "You lied to me. All these years I thought Helena was mine. I gave you money. I stayed away because you asked me to, because you said it would be better for Helena." "I was scared," Maria cried. "When I found out I was pregnant, Antonio was killed in a car accident the very next day. I had no one, no family to help me. I knew you had feelings for me, Roberto. I thought if you believed the baby was yours, you would help us." Helena felt like she was watching a soap opera unfold before her eyes, except she was caught in the middle of it. "So let me get this straight. You lied to Roberto about being my father just to get his money, and she turned to Roberto. "You've been stalking me my entire life because you thought I was your daughter, and then you married me?" Her voice rose with each question, the horror of the situation sinking in deeper. "I didn't know what else to do," Maria said, tears rolling down her cheeks. "When Antonio died, I was alone and pregnant. Roberto was married to a powerful woman. If she found out about us, even just the affair, she would have destroyed me. So you took my money and disappeared," Roberto said bitterly. "And I've spent the last 23 years thinking I had a daughter out there, feeling guilty for abandoning her." "Why did you come back into my life?" Helena asked him, still trying to process everything. "Why the marriage?" Roberto looked ashamed. "When my wife died, I finally felt free to find you. I hired investigators, tracked you down. I just wanted to meet you at first, to see what you were like. That's why I came to the cafe where you worked, but you were so bright, so full of life. You looked so much like Maria when she was young. I confused my feelings. I thought what I felt was love, romantic love." "That's sick," Carlos spat. "You married a woman you thought was your daughter." "I never thought of her that way," Roberto protested. "In my mind, she was this wonderful young woman who happened to be my daughter. The two feelings were separate. And once we were married, I realized my mistake. That's why we never consummated the marriage," Helena finished for him, feeling ill. "And that's why you kept finding excuses to sleep in separate rooms." Roberto nodded, unable to look at her. "What I don't understand," Helena said, turning back to her mother, "is why you're here now. How did you know to come?" Maria glanced at Carlos, who smirked. "I called her," he said. "I've had my suspicions about you from the start, Helena. I hired my own investigators. They found Maria, and when I told her about the marriage, she finally confessed everything." "You knew?" Helena asked her mother, betrayal cutting deep. "You knew I was married to Roberto and you didn't warn me?" "I only found out yesterday when Carlos called me. I came as fast as I could." Maria reached for Helena's hand, but Helena pulled away. "Honey, I never thought Roberto would find you, let alone marry you. When I heard, I knew I had to tell the truth." "The truth," Helena repeated, the word tasting bitter in her mouth. 23 years too late. Roberto sank back into his chair, looking suddenly old and frail. "All these years I thought I was watching over my daughter. I sent you money, Maria. I made sure you and Helena were taken care of, even from a distance. And I'm grateful for that," Maria said quietly. "But the lie became too big. When Helena started working at that cafe near your office, I was terrified you might run into her. That's why I kept pushing her to quit, to find another job." Helena remembered her mother's strange insistence that she leave the cafe job, how she'd argued against it. If only she had listened. "So what happens now?" Carlos asked, looking at each of them in turn. "We have a big mess on our hands. My father married a woman he thought was his daughter, who turns out not to be his daughter after all. The press would have a field day with this." "Nothing happens," Roberto said firmly. "No one outside this room ever needs to know the truth. Helena and I will get an annulment quietly. We'll say it was a mistake, that we rushed into things." "And what about me?" Helena asked, feeling hollow. "My whole life has been built on lies. I don't even know who I am anymore." "You're still Helena," Maria said softly. "You're still my daughter. Antonio would have loved you so much if he had lived." "Tell me about him," Helena said, suddenly desperate to know about her real father. "What was he like?" Maria's face softened, with memories. "He was kind and gentle. He had the most beautiful smile, just like yours. He loved music and would sing to me in Spanish, his mother's language. He was saving money to open his own garage someday." "Did he know about me before?" "He died, yes," Maria whispered. "I told him the morning of the accident. He was so happy, Helena. He picked me up and spun me around right there in the kitchen. He couldn't wait to be a father." Helena felt tears sliding down her cheeks. All these years, she'd believed her father had died before knowing about her. It was a small comfort to know he had been happy about her existence, even if just for a few hours. Roberto cleared his throat. I remember Antonio. He was a good man, a hard worker. The accident wasn't his fault. Another driver ran a red light, hit his car on the driver's side. He died instantly. At least he didn't suffer, Maria said, wiping her eyes. Carlos, who had been watching this exchange with growing impatience, stood up. This is all very touching, but we need to deal with the present, not the past. Father, I suggest you call your lawyer immediately to start the annulment process. I agree, Helena said, standing as well. The sooner we end this mistake, the better. Where will you go? Roberto asked, looking concerned. Home with my mother for now, then as far away from here as possible. Roberto nodded sadly. Of course, but Helena, regardless of biology, I've come to care for you deeply. Not as a husband, I see now how wrong that was, but I would like to help you. You deserve a chance at a better life. I don't want your money, Helena said firmly. It's not about money, it's about making amends for the pain I've caused you. Please, let me help you start fresh somewhere. Consider it compensation for the trauma of this whole situation. Before Helena could respond, the doorbell rang. Carlos went to answer it, returning moments later with a worried expression. It's the press, he said in a low voice. Someone tipped them off about a situation at the Alcantara penthouse. They're asking for a statement about the marriage. What did you tell them? Roberto demanded. Nothing yet. I said you'd be down. Shortly. Helena felt panic rising in her chest. What are we going to do? We can't tell them the truth. Of course not, Roberto said, straightening his jacket and regaining some of his usual commanding presence. I'll handle this. I've dealt with the press for decades. What are you going to say? Maria asked, looking nervous. The truth, or part of it, that Helena and I have decided to annul our marriage because we rushed into things without really knowing each other. It happens all the time with celebrities. And what about us? Helena gestured between herself and Roberto. What do we tell them about our relationship now? Roberto thought for a moment. Nothing. The less said, the better. We'll simply say we're parting as friends and request privacy at this difficult time. They won't buy that, Carlos scoffed. Not after the spectacle you made of the wedding. They'll dig and dig until they find something juicy. Then we'll give them something else to talk about, Roberto said, a calculating look coming into his eyes. Carlos, call Sofia Martinez. The actress? Carlos looked confused. Why? She owes me a favor. Ask her to create a scene at her premiere tonight, something scandalous enough to push our story off the front page. Helena stared at Roberto. Is that how the rich and powerful handle their problems? Just create another scandal to hide the first one? Welcome to my world, Roberto said grimly. Now I suggest you and Maria slip out the back while I deal with the press. My driver will take you wherever you want to go. As if on cue, Roberto's phone rang. He looked at the screen and frowned. It's Victor Rojas from Global News. He's relentless, always looking for dirt on me. He answered the call, his voice immediately shifting to a pleasant, confident tone. Victor, what a surprise. While Roberto was distracted, Carlos pulled Helena aside. I know we got off on the wrong foot, but I want you to know I don't blame you for this mess. My father has always been obsessed with controlling everything and everyone around him. Helena was surprised by his sudden change in attitude. Thank you, I guess, but I still feel like a fool for not seeing through him. He's had decades of practice manipulating people, Carlos said, his voice bitter. Just be glad you're getting out now, before things got worse. Could they be worse than accidentally marrying a man I thought was my father but isn't? Carlos's expression darkened. You have no idea what he's capable of. The business empire he's built isn't all clean money and honest deals. There are skeletons in the Alcantara closet that would make this scandal look like nothing. Helena felt a chill run down her spine. What are you saying? Before Carlos could answer, Roberto ended his call and rejoined them. It's handled for now. I've agreed to an exclusive interview tomorrow, which should give us time to get our story straight. Victor thinks he's getting a tell-all about the marriage, but all he'll get is a carefully curated version of events. He turned to Helena and Maria. My driver is waiting at the service entrance. He'll take you wherever you need to go. And Helena, please think about my offer. I truly want to make amends. Helena felt torn. Part of her wanted to run as far from Roberto Alcantara as possible, but another part was curious about what Carlos had been about to say. What secrets was Roberto hiding, and did they have anything to do with her real father's death? "I'll think about it," she said finally. "But right now I just want to leave." Maria squeezed her daughter's hand. "Let's go home, honey." As they walked toward the service elevator, Helena glanced back at Roberto and Carlos, father and son, standing in the luxurious penthouse that had briefly been her home. They looked like strangers to her now, these Alcantara men with their secrets and power plays. The elevator doors closed, and Helena leaned against the wall, suddenly exhausted. "What a mess," she whispered. Maria nodded, her eyes sad. "I'm so sorry, Helena. I never meant for any of this to happen. I was just trying to protect you by lying to me my entire life." Helena couldn't keep the hurt from her voice. "I thought it was for the best. Antonio was gone, and I didn't want you to grow up feeling like you were missing something. It seemed kinder to tell you your father had died before knowing about you than to tell you he died right after finding out." They rode the rest of the way in silence, each lost in her own thoughts. When they reached the service entrance, a sleek black car was waiting, the driver holding the door open for them. As they settled into the back seat, Helena noticed a manila envelope on the seat with her name written on it. She opened it to find a check for $1 million and a handwritten note from Roberto. "For a fresh start. No strings attached. I'm sorry for everything." Helena stared at the check, feeling conflicted. Taking his money felt wrong, but $1 million could change her life completely. She could go anywhere, do anything. "What's that?" Maria asked, peering at the envelope. "Blood money," Helena said, shoving the check back into the envelope. "Or guilt money. I'm not sure which is worse." The driver cleared his throat. "Excuse me, but Mr. Alcantara asked me to give you this as well." He handed back a small velvet. As Helena opened it to find a beautiful gold locket. Inside was a tiny black and white photo of a young man with a bright smile, a smile she recognized from her own mirror. "Antonio," Maria gasped, touching the photo with trembling fingers. "That's your father. Where did Roberto get this?" "There's a note," Helena said, unfolding a small piece of paper tucked into the box. "I kept this all these years," Roberto had written. "Antonio gave it to me the day before the accident, asked me to have it cleaned for your birthday. I never had the chance to return it. It belongs with his daughter." Now, Helena closed the locket and slipped the chain around her neck, feeling the weight of it against her skin. It was the first real connection she'd ever had to her biological father. "Tell me everything about him," she said to her mother as the car pulled away from the Alcantara building. "I want to know who I really am." As they drove through the city, Maria began to tell the story of Antonio Diaz, the young man with the beautiful smile who had briefly captured her heart before tragedy struck. And Helena listened, piecing together the fragments of her true identity, while behind them the world of the Alcantaras receded into the distance, but not, she suspected, out of her life completely. Back in the penthouse, Carlos watched the AI car disappear into traffic before turning to his father. "Do you really think she'll just take the money and disappear?" he asked skeptically. Roberto sighed, suddenly looking every one of his 78 years. "No, she's too much like her mother for that, and too curious now that you've planted the seed about our family's darker dealings." "You noticed that, did you?" Carlos smiled thinly. "I thought she deserved to know what kind of man you really are." "What kind of man we both are," Roberto corrected him. "Don't pretend your hands are clean in this, son. We've built this empire together, made the hard choices together, and now what's the plan for damage control?" Roberto walked to the window, looking out at the city he had spent decades conquering. "We stick to the story. The marriage was a mistake. We're annulling it quietly. As for Helena..." "Yes?" "Keep an eye on her. If she starts asking questions about Antonio's accident, if she gets too close to the truth..." Roberto's voice hardened. "Handle it." Carlos nodded, a cold smile spreading across his face. "Consider it done, father." 3 weeks had passed since Helena discovered the truth about Roberto and fled the penthouse. She was back in her mother's small apartment, sleeping on the pull-out couch in the living room, just as she had during her college years. The check for $1 million remained untouched in her dresser drawer. Every morning she would take it out, stare at it, then put it back. Taking the money felt like accepting what had happened, like putting a price on the deception she had endured. The gold locket with Antonio's picture, however, never left her neck. She often found herself touching it absently, wondering about the father she never knew. "You should cash that check," Maria said one morning as she caught Helena looking at it again. "Roberto owes you at least that much after what he put you through." "I don't want anything from him," Helena replied, tucking the check away. "Besides, wouldn't that make me exactly what everyone thought I was? A gold digger?" Maria sighed, sitting down beside her daughter. "No one who matters thinks that, and that money could give you a fresh start somewhere new, away from all the gossip." The annulment had gone through quickly and quietly, but not before the tabloids had time to feast on the story. "Alcantara marriage over after 1 week," screamed the headlines. Some papers speculated that Helena had been after Roberto's money all along, while others suggested the age gap had proven too great to overcome. Roberto had kept his word and never revealed the truth behind their split. In his sole statement to the press, he had called Helena a wonderful young woman and said they had rushed into marriage without truly knowing each other. Helena had remained silent, ignoring the reporters who camped outside her mother's apartment. Building for the first week before finally giving up, her phone buzzed with a text message. It was from Lucia, her best friend. "Turn on Channel 8 right now. Roberto Alcantara is announcing his retirement." Helena grabbed the remote and switched on the TV. There was Roberto, looking distinguished in a navy suit, standing at a podium with the Alcantara Industries logo behind him. "After 50 years at the helm of Alcantara Industries, I have decided it is time to step down as CEO," he was saying, his voice steady despite his age. "It has been the honor of my life to build this company from the ground up. But the time has come for new leadership. I am pleased to announce that my son, Carlos Alcantara, will be taking over as CEO, effective immediately." The camera panned to Carlos, standing to the side, clapping politely with a satisfied smile on his face. "This transition has been planned for some time," Roberto continued. "Though recent personal events have accelerated my decision, I look forward to serving as chairman of the board while enjoying a more balanced life in the years ahead." Helena turned off the TV, feeling strangely hollow. Was Roberto's retirement somehow connected to their failed marriage? Had the scandal weakened his position in the company? Her phone rang. "Unknown number." "Hello?" she answered cautiously. "Helena? It's Victor Rojas from Global News." Helena's grip tightened on the phone. Victor Rojas was one of the most aggressive, investigative journalists in the city, known for exposing corporate scandals and political corruption. "How did you get this number?" she demanded. "I have my sources," Victor replied smoothly. "I'm calling because I think there's more to your story with Roberto Alcantara than what's been reported. I'd like to meet with you." "There's nothing to tell," Helena said, trying to keep her voice steady. "The marriage was a mistake and now it's over." "I think there's a lot more to it than that," Victor pressed. "I've been investigating the Alcantara family for years. They're not as clean as they appear. And I think you might have information that could help me. I don't know what you're talking about." "I'm talking about Antonio Diaz." Helena nearly dropped the phone. "What did you say?" "Antonio Diaz," Victor repeated. "Roberto's driver who died in a car accident 23 years ago." "Your real father?" Helena's blood ran cold. "How do you know that?" "Like I said, I have my sources. Meet me at the Blue Cafe on 5th Street tomorrow at 2 p.m. Come alone. I have information about your father's death that you need to hear." The line went dead before Helena could respond. Maria came into the room looking concerned. "Who was that? You're white as a sheet." Helena sank onto the couch, her legs suddenly weak. "A reporter named Victor Rojas. He knows about Antonio. He says he has information about his death." Maria's face paled. "Victor Rojas? The one who's always exposing scandals?" "Helena, you can't meet with him. It's too dangerous." "Dangerous? Mom, what are you not telling me? Was there something suspicious about Antonio's death?" Maria looked away, wringing her hands. "It was an accident. That's what the police said." Another driver ran a red light. But, Helena pressed, sensing her mother's hesitation. But Antonio was always such a careful driver, Maria said quietly. And the timing. Right after he found out about the pregnancy, right after he told me. He wanted to leave his job with Roberto to open his own garage. You think it wasn't an accident? I don't know, Maria admitted. There were rumors among the staff that Roberto could be ruthless with people who crossed him. But I never had any proof, and I was too scared and heartbroken to ask questions. Helena fingered the locket around her neck. Well, I'm not scared. I'm meeting Victor tomorrow. Helena, please, Maria begged. The Alcantaras are powerful people. If they had something to do with Antonio's death, then they should pay for it, Helena finished firmly. Don't you want to know the truth? Maria looked torn. Of course I do, but not at the cost of losing you too. Helena hugged her mother tightly. You won't lose me, I'll be careful. The next day, Helena arrived at the Blue Cafe 15 minutes early, choosing a table in the back corner where she could see the door. She ordered a coffee and waited nervously, checking her watch every few minutes. At exactly 2 p.m., Victor Rojas walked in. He was younger than she expected, maybe in his mid-30s, with sharp eyes that seemed to miss nothing. He spotted her immediately and walked over, sliding into the seat across from her. Thank you for coming, he said, keeping his voice low. I wasn't sure you would. You said you have information about my father, Helena replied. I want to hear it. Victor nodded, pulling a small recorder from his pocket. Do you mind if I record our conversation? For my notes only, not for publication without your consent. Helena hesitated, then nodded. Victor switched on the recorder and placed it on the table between them. I've been investigating the Alcantara family for 3 years, he began. What started as a piece on corporate tax evasion has evolved into something much darker. Roberto Alcantara has built his empire not just on business acumen, but on intimidation, bribery, and possibly even murder. Murder, Helena whispered, feeling sick. I can't prove it yet, but I have a pattern of suspicious deaths connected to the company. People who knew too much, who threatened to expose Alcantara practices, who stood in the way of business deals. Victor pulled a folder from his bag and slid it across the table. Antonio Diaz is one of those deaths. Helena opened the folder with trembling hands. Inside was a copy of a police report about Antonio's accident, along with several newspaper clippings and what looked like internal Alcantara Industries memos. The official story is that Antonio died when another driver ran a red light and T-boned his car, Victor explained. What the police report doesn't mention is that the other driver disappeared immediately after the accident. He was never charged, and the traffic camera at that intersection was mysteriously non-operational that day. Helena looked up from the documents, her throat tight. You think Roberto had him killed, but why? Antonio was just his driver. Was he, though? Victor leaned forward. According to my sources, Antonio Diaz was more than just a driver. He had access to Roberto's private meetings, drove him to locations that weren't on any official schedule. He could have overheard things. Seen things like what? Like meetings with known organized crime figures, like payoffs to government officials. The early 90s were a wild time in the business world, and Roberto was expanding aggressively, sometimes into territories where he wasn't welcome. Helena tried to process this information. Could Roberto, the man who had seemed so kind and gentle, with her really be capable of such things? The man who had kept her father's locket for 23 years. There's something else you should know, Victor continued, pulling another document from the folder. 2 days before his death, Antonio made a large deposit into a bank account in Maria Martinez's name. $50,000. What? Helena was stunned. My mother never mentioned any money. Maybe she didn't know about it. The account was opened in her name, but the paperwork was filled out by Antonio. My guess is he was planning to take her and run, maybe start that garage he dreamed of somewhere far away. But the money disappeared, Victor finished. Withdrawn in cash the day after Antonio's funeral by someone using Maria's ID. But according to my research, Maria was at the funeral home that day, making final arrangements. Helena's mind was racing. If her mother didn't withdraw the money, who did? I think Antonio knew something, Victor said, his eyes intense. Something that made him want to get away from the Alcantaras as quickly as possible. Something worth killing him for. This is a lot to take in, Helena said, closing the folder. I know, Victor acknowledged, and I'm not asking you to believe everything right away. Take the folder, review the documents, but there's one more thing you should see. He pulled out his phone and showed her a photo. It was a younger Roberto Alcantara, standing with several men Helena didn't recognize in front of what looked like a warehouse. This was taken a week before Antonio's death. The man on the right is Javier Mendez, a known enforcer for the Castillo crime family. 2 days after this photo, the warehouse burned down, destroying evidence in a case against the Castillos. And guess who owned the insurance company that paid out millions for the loss? Alcantara Industries, Helena guessed, feeling cold all over. Exactly. Now I can't prove that Antonio saw this meeting or knew about the arson plan, but the timing of his death, the missing money, the fact that he got your mother pregnant and was planning to leave, it's circumstantial, Helena said, though doubt was creeping into her mind. For now, Victor agreed. That's why I need your help. As Roberto's ex-wife, you might have access to information, to people who wouldn't talk to me. The story I'm working on could bring down the entire Alcantara empire and get justice for your father. Helena stared at the folder in her hands. Could she really help take down Roberto? The man had lied to her, manipulated her, married her under false pretenses, but he had also shown kindness, had kept Antonio's locket all these years, had tried to make amends, in his own way. I need time to think, she said finally, and to talk to my mother about this. Victor nodded, switching off the recorder. I understand. Here's my card with my private number. Call me when you're ready to talk again. He stood up to leave, then hesitated. Be careful, Helena. The Alcantaras have eyes everywhere. Trust no one until we know more. After Victor left, Helena sat in the cafe for a long time, staring at the folder and turning the locket over in her fingers. Finally, she made a decision. She pulled out her phone and dialed a number she had sworn she would never call again. Carlos Alcantara, the familiar voice answered. It's Helena. We need to talk. There was a pause. I'm surprised to hear from you. I have questions about my father, my real father, Antonio Diaz. Another pause, longer this time. I'm not sure I can help you with that. I was just a child when he worked for my father. You might not know the answers, but I think your father does. And after everything that's happened, I deserve the truth. What brought this on suddenly? Carlos sounded suspicious. Helena decided to be direct. I was contacted by a reporter named Victor Rojas. He's investigating your family, and he has theories about Antonio's death. Victor Rojas, Carlos repeated, his tone hardening. That man has been a thorn in our side for years. What did he tell you? Enough to make me question everything. I want to hear your father's side of the story. I'll need to discuss this with him, Carlos said cautiously. He's been fragile since your annulment. The retirement wasn't just for show. Helena felt a twinge of concern despite herself. What do you mean, fragile? He's not sleeping, barely eating. The doctor says it's depression. He keeps talking about making amends, about fixing past mistakes. Helena hadn't expected this. In her mind, Roberto had simply moved on, back to his life of wealth and power. The idea that he was suffering made her uncomfortable. I still want to meet with him, she insisted. I'll talk to him, Carlos promised. But Helena, be careful with Rojas. He doesn't care about you or your father. He just wants his big story, no matter who gets hurt in the process. After hanging up, Helena headed home, the folder tucked securely in her bag. Her mind was swirling with questions. Was Victor telling the truth about Antonio's death? Was Roberto really capable of murder? And what about Carlos? Could she trust his apparent concern? Or was he just trying to protect the family name? When she reached her mother's apartment, she found Maria sitting on the couch, looking worried. Thank God you're back, Maria said, standing up to hug her. I was so worried after you left to meet that reporter. I'm fine, Mom, Helena assured her. But we need to talk about something. What is it? Helena took a deep breath. Did you know that Antonio made a large deposit into a bank account in your name right before he died? $50,000. Maria's face drained of color. What? No, that's impossible. Antonio didn't have that kind of money. According to Victor Rojas, he did, and the money was withdrawn the day after his funeral while you were at the funeral home. Someone used your ID. Maria sank back onto the couch, her eyes wide with shock. I never knew about any account, and I certainly never withdrew any money. Who would have... Oh my God. What is it, Mum? Roberto, Maria whispered. He came to the funeral home that day, said he wanted to pay his respects privately. He asked for my purse to put some money in for funeral expenses. I gave it to him without thinking. My ID was in there. Helena felt a chill run down her spine. So Roberto took the money. But why? And where did Antonio get that much money in? The first place? Before Maria could answer, Helena's phone rang. It was Carlos. My father has agreed to meet with you, he said without preamble. Tomorrow at noon at his country house. I'll text you the address. Come alone. I'll be there, Helena said, ending the call. She turned to her mother. That was Carlos. Roberto has agreed to meet with me tomorrow to talk about Antonio. Don't go, Maria pleaded. If what that reporter says is true, if Roberto had something to do with Antonio's death, it's too dangerous. I'll be careful, Helena promised, but I need to know the truth, Mom, for Antonio's sake, for my sake. Maria looked at her daughter, with tears in her eyes. You have his determination, you know. Antonio never backed down from anything either. Helena fingered the locket around her neck. Tell me more about him. Everything you can remember. As the evening wore on, Maria shared stories of her brief time with Antonio, his dreams, his humor, his kindness, and Helena listened, building a picture of the father she never knew, the man whose blood ran in her veins. The next morning, Helena dressed carefully in jeans and a simple blouse, tucking the locket inside her shirt. She put Victor's folder in her bag, along with a small voice recorder Lucia had lent her. If Roberto was going to tell her the truth about Antonio, she wanted a record of it. Please be careful, Maria said as Helena prepared to leave. Call me as soon as you're done. I will, Helena promised, hugging her mother tightly. The taxi ride to Roberto's country house took almost an hour, winding through increasingly rural areas until they turned onto a private road bordered by tall trees. At the end was a large, elegant house with a view of the mountains in the distance. As the taxi pulled up to the front door, Carlos came out to meet her. He looked tired, the strain of recent events visible on his face. Thank you for coming, he said, his tone formal. My father is on the terrace. He prefers to be outside these days. Helena followed Carlos through the house, noting how different it was from the sleek, modern penthouse. This place was warmer, filled with antiques and family photos. It felt more like a home than a showpiece. On the terrace, Roberto sat in a wheelchair, a blanket over his legs despite the warm day. He looked smaller, somehow diminished from the powerful figure she remembered. When he saw her, his face lit up briefly before settling into a cautious smile. Helena, he said, his voice weaker than she remembered. Thank you for agreeing to see me. Carlos pulled out a chair for her, then addressed his father. I'll leave you two to talk. Call if you need anything. After Carlos left, an awkward silence fell between them. Roberto broke it first. You look well, he said. The annulment went through without problems. Yes, Helena replied stiffly. Everything's back to normal, except for the part where I accidentally married a man who thought he was my father. Roberto winced. I deserve that. I deserve much worse, in fact. But I am truly sorry, Helena. Not just for the marriage, but for all the deception that led to it. Helena decided to get straight to the point. I want to know about Antonio Diaz. I want to know how he really died. Roberto's face tightened, and for a moment she saw a flash of the powerful CEO he had once been. Who has been talking to you? Victor Rojas? Does it matter? I deserve to know the truth about my father. Roberto sighed, looking out at the mountains. Yes, you do. But the truth is complicated, Helena, and not what you might think. Tell me anyway. Roberto was quiet for a moment, as if gathering his thoughts. Antonio was a good man. Too good for the world he was caught up in. I cared about him, trusted him more than most of my senior executives. He was loyal, discreet. Then why did he die? Helena asked, her voice breaking slightly. Right after he found out my mother was pregnant, Roberto's eyes filled with unexpected tears. Because of me. Because he was trying to protect me. And I failed to protect him. Helena hadn't expected this. What do you mean? The official story is that Antonio died in a random traffic accident. The reality is that he was murdered. But not by me, Helena. I would never have hurt him. He was killed by the Castillo family. The crime family? Why? Because he witnessed something he shouldn't have. A meeting between Javier Mendez and several corrupted police officials. I had sent Antonio to deliver a package. Legitimate business. Documents, nothing illegal. He arrived early and saw the meeting. Mendez spotted him. So the Castillos had him killed because he saw this meeting. Helena was trying to make sense of it all. But what about the $50,000 he deposited in my mother's name? Roberto looked surprised. You know about that? Victor Rojas has been very thorough. That money was from me, Roberto admitted. When Antonio told me what he had seen, I knew he was in danger. I gave him the money to take Maria and disappear. I had papers ready, new identities. They were supposed to leave that night, but Antonio insisted on telling Maria about the baby first, on making things right with her. And the money disappeared after his death? Withdrawn using my mother's ID? Roberto nodded slowly. Yes. I took it. Not for myself. I put it in a trust for you. It's part of the $1 million I gave you after the annulment. I've been adding to it every year, watching it grow. I always intended it for you, Helena, Antonio's child. Helena felt dizzy with all these revelations. Why didn't you tell my mother any of this? Why let her believe it was just an accident? Protect her, Roberto said simply. The Castillos would have killed her too if they thought she knew anything. It was safer for her to be in the dark, to be just the grieving girlfriend of a driver who died in an accident. And all these years, you've been what? Feeling guilty? Watching over us from a distance? Yes, Roberto acknowledged. I couldn't bring Antonio back, but I could make sure his child and the woman he loved were taken care of. It wasn't enough, I know that. Nothing could be enough. Helena's hand went to the locket around her neck. And this? You kept it all these years? Antonio gave it to me the day before he died. The chain was broken and he wanted to give it to Maria for her birthday. After he died, I couldn't bring myself to part with it. It was the only piece of him I had left. Roberto's voice broke. He was like a son to me, Helena. The son I wished Carlos had been. The mention of Carlos made Helena glance toward the house. Does Carlos know all this? Some of it, not everything. Carlos was always difficult, jealous of my relationship with Antonio, even though they were years apart. When Carlos joined the company after college, I kept him away from the darker aspects of the business. I wanted better for him. But power corrupts, and Carlos, he embraced the darkness I was trying to escape. What are you saying? Roberto leaned forward, lowering his voice. The retirement announcement wasn't my idea. Carlos forced me out. He's been making alliances with people I've spent years avoiding. The Castillos, corrupt politicians. He's taking the company in directions I never wanted it to go. Helena felt a chill. Why are you telling me this? Because you deserve the truth. And because I'm afraid, Helena. Not for myself. I'm an old man, and my time is nearly up. But for you. If Carlos discovers that you know about Antonio, about the Castillos, he wouldn't hurt me, Helena said, though uncertainty crept into her voice. He's been almost kind to me since the annulment. Don't be fooled, Roberto warned. Carlos is a master manipulator. He sees you as a threat to the Alcantara name, to his position, and now that you're asking questions, meeting with Victor Rojas, Helena suddenly felt exposed, vulnerable. What should I do? Take the money I gave you and disappear, Roberto said urgently. Go somewhere Carlos can't find you. Start a new life, the life Antonio and Maria should have had. What about my mother? Take her with you. It's not safe for either of you now. Helena stared at the old man before her, trying to reconcile this version of Roberto with the one who had courted her, married her, lied to her. Was this just another manipulation? How do I know you're telling the truth? She asked. How do I know this isn't another lie to protect yourself, your company. Roberto reached out a trembling hand to touch the locket around her neck. Because I loved Antonio like a son, and I care about you, Helena. Not as a husband. That was my greatest mistake, confusing my feelings that way. But as the daughter of a man I respected, Antonio deserved better than what happened to him, and you deserve the truth even if it's ugly. Before Helena could respond, they heard footsteps approaching. Carlos appeared at the terrace door, his expression unreadable. "How's the reunion going?" he asked, his tone light but his eyes cold. "Finding the answers you were looking for, Helena?" Helena felt Roberto's hand tighten on hers, a silent warning. She forced a smile. "Just catching up. Your father has been very illuminating." Carlos looked between them, suspicion evident in his gaze. "I'm sure he has. Father has always had a talent for storytelling, especially when it comes to rewriting history." "I'm just telling Helena the truth, son," Roberto said wearily. "Something I should have done long ago." "The truth," Carlos repeated with a humorless laugh. "Your version of it, anyway." A heavy silence fell over the terrace. Helena felt caught between these two men, each with their own agenda, their own version of events. Who could she really trust? "I should go," she said, standing up. "My mother is expecting me." "So soon?" Carlos asked, stepping closer. "I thought we might all have lunch together. After all, we're almost family, aren't we?" The way he said it made Helena's skin crawl. She glanced at Roberto, whose face had gone pale. "Another time, perhaps," she said, gathering her bag. "Thank you for meeting with me, Roberto." "Helena," Roberto called as she turned to leave. "Remember what I said, please." She nodded, understanding the subtext. "Take the money and run." Carlos walked her to the front door, his hand on her elbow in a grip that was just a little too tight. "Victor Rojas is a dangerous man to associate with," he said conversationally. "He doesn't understand our world, the complexities of business at our level." "I'm sure he doesn't," Helena replied non-committally. "If he contacts you again, I'd appreciate you letting me know. It wasn't a request." "Of course," she lied. At the door, Carlos stopped her. "One more thing, Helena. That folder Rojas gave you, I'd like to see it." Helena's heart skipped a beat. How did he know about the folder? Had she been followed? "What folder?" Carlos smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. "Don't play games. I know he gave you documents. They belong to Alcantara Industries, and they're confidential." "I don't have anything like that," Helena insisted, though her bag felt suddenly heavy with the folder inside. "No?" Carlos's expression hardened. "Then you won't mind if I check your bag?" Before she could protest, he reached for her bag. Helena pulled back instinctively, and as she did, her phone fell out, clattering to the floor. When she bent to pick it up, she saw that the voice recorder was still running, had been recording her entire conversation with Roberto, and Carlos saw it too. His face darkened with anger. "You've been recording us? Who put you up to this? Rojas?" "It's not what you think," Helena began, but Carlos cut her off. "I think it's exactly what it looks like. You came here to gather evidence to help Rojas with his witch hunt against my family." "Your father wanted to talk to me," Helena protested. "He wanted to tell me the truth about Antonio." "My father is a sick old man who doesn't know what he's saying half the time," Carlos snapped. "And Antonio Diaz was nothing, a driver who died in a meaningless accident decades ago." "He was my father," Helena said, her voice rising. "And he didn't die in an accident, he was murdered." As soon as the words left her mouth, Helena knew she had made a terrible mistake. Carlos's expression changed from anger to something much more dangerous: calculation. "I see my father has been telling tales," he said softly. "How unfortunate. For both of you." Helena backed toward the door. "I'm leaving now. Don't try to stop me." "Of course," Carlos said, stepping aside with exaggerated politeness. "But Helena, a word of advice. Forget everything my father told you. Forget about Antonio Diaz. If you pursue this, if you help Rojas with his story, you'll regret it, and so will your mother." The threat hung in the air between them. Helena turned and walked quickly to the waiting taxi, feeling Carlos's eyes on her the entire time. As the taxi pulled away, she looked back at the elegant house. Roberto stood at an upstairs window watching her go, his expression one of profound sadness and regret. Helena clutched her bag with the folder and the recorder, her mind racing. She needed to get to her mother, to warn her. Then they needed to decide run, as Roberto suggested, or fight back against the Alcantaras, help Victor Rojas expose their crimes. The locket felt heavy against her skin, a connection to the father she never knew. What would Antonio have wanted her to do? The taxi turned onto the main road, leaving the Alcantara estate behind. But Helena knew this wasn't the end. It was only the beginning of a dangerous game, one that had already claimed her father's life, and if she wasn't careful, she might be next. Mom, are you here? Helena burst into the apartment, breathless from running up 4 flights of stairs. The elevator had been out of order. As usual, there was no answer. The small living room was empty, the kitchenette spotless. Too spotless. Maria always left a coffee cup in the sink or a dish towel on the counter. Mom, Helena called again, her voice rising with panic as she checked the bedroom and bathroom, empty. She pulled out her phone and dialed her mother's number. It went straight to voicemail. Mom, it's me. Call me as soon as you get this. It's urgent. Next, she called Lucia. Have you seen my mom today? She asked without preamble. No. Why? Is something wrong? I don't know. She's not home and she's not answering her phone. Maybe she went shopping or to visit her sister in Westview. Maybe, Helena said, though the knot in her stomach told her otherwise. If you hear from her, tell her to call me right away. After hanging up, Helena noticed a blinking light on the answering machine. They rarely used the landline, but Maria insisted on keeping it. Helena pressed play, her heart pounding. Ms. Martinez, this is Nurse Garcia from Mercy Hospital. I'm Ho. Calling about your mother, Maria Martinez. She was brought in about an hour ago after a minor traffic accident. She's not seriously injured, but she's asking for you. Please come to the emergency room as soon as possible. Helena grabbed her purse and ran back down the stairs. 20 minutes later, she burst into the emergency room of Mercy Hospital. I'm looking for Maria Martinez, she told the nurse at the desk. She was brought in after a traffic accident. The nurse checked her computer. Martinez, yes, she's in treatment room 3. Are you family? I'm her daughter. Go on back. Dr. Patel is with her now. Helena found her mother sitting on an exam table, a bandage on her forehead and her right arm in a sling. A young doctor was checking her pupils with a small light. Mom! Helena rushed to her side. What happened? Maria looked up, relief washing over her face. Helena, thank God, I was so worried when I couldn't reach you. Your mother has a mild concussion and a sprained wrist, Dr. Patel explained. She's very lucky. The car that hit her was moving at a good speed. Car? What car? Maria waited until the doctor left before speaking in a low voice. It wasn't an accident, Helena. I was walking home from the grocery store when a black SUV jumped the curb. If I hadn't jumped out of the way at the last second, a chill ran down Helena's spine. Did you see who was driving? No, but just before it happened, I got a strange call from Carlos Alcantara. He asked where you were, said he needed to speak with you urgently. When I told him I didn't know, he hung up. Chais. Minutes later, the SUV came out of nowhere. Helena felt sick. This is my fault. I went to see Roberto today. Carlos found out I was recording our conversation, that I know about Antonio's murder. He threatened me. And you. Oh, Helena. Maria's eyes filled with tears. What have you gotten yourself into? I'm sorry, Mum. I just wanted the truth about my father, but now... Helena took her mother's hand. We need to get out of here. Roberto warned me that Carlos is dangerous. He told me to take the money and disappear. And you believe him, after everything he did? I don't know who to believe anymore, but I do know that someone just tried to hurt you, and it's connected to what I've been digging into. Helena helped her mother stand up. We'll go back to the apartment, pack what we need, and then check into a hotel where Carlos can't find us. What about Victor Rojas? Maria asked as they walked to the exit. Could he help us? Maybe. I'll call him once we're somewhere safe. They took a taxi back to the apartment, both scanning the streets nervously for black SUVs. Once inside, Helena quickly packed a bag for each of them while Maria sat on the couch, still dazed from her ordeal. I'm going to cash that check from Roberto, Helena decided, pulling it from the drawer. We'll need money to disappear properly. Are you sure that's wise? Maria asked. Using his money? At this point, I don't think we have a choice. And besides, according to Roberto, part of it was always meant for me. The money Antonio had set aside for us before he died. As Helena was zipping up their bags, her phone rang. Unknown number. Hello? She answered cautiously. Helena, it's Victor Rojas. I've been trying to reach you. Something big is happening at Alcantara Industries. Roberto has called an emergency board. Meeting for this afternoon. My sources say he's going to expose Carlos's illegal dealings. What? But Carlos forced him into retirement. Why would the board listen to him now? Roberto still owns controlling interest in the company. And apparently he has evidence. Documents, recordings. This could be the break I've been waiting for. Can you meet me? Helena hesitated, glancing at her mother. It's not a good time, Victor. Someone just tried to run down my mother with an SUV. We're leaving town. Carlos, Victor said grimly. He's getting desperate. Listen, this board meeting might be our only chance to bring him down. If Roberto exposes him, the police will get involved. You and your mother will be safe. Or Carlos could get to Roberto first, Helena pointed out. Or destroy the evidence. That's why I need your help. The recording you made today of your conversation with Roberto, it could be crucial. And I heard you have a folder of documents. I gave you? How did you know I recorded our conversation? Helena asked, suddenly suspicious. I didn't for sure until now, but it's what I would have done in your position. Victor's voice softened. Helena, I know you're scared, but we're so close to the truth, to justice for your father. Helena thought of Antonio's locket around her neck, of her mother's bandaged head, of Roberto's sad eyes as he watched her leave. What do you need me to do? Meet me at Alcantara Tower at 3 p.m. I'll be waiting in the cafe across the street. Bring the recording and the folder. After hanging up, Helena turned to her mother. That was Victor. Roberto is planning to expose Carlos at a board meeting today. Victor wants me to help. It's too dangerous, Maria protested. Carlos already tried to kill me. What do you think he'll do to you if you help bring him down? But if we don't do something, we'll be looking over our shoulders forever. This might be our only chance to end this. Helena knelt beside her mother. I need to do this for Antonio, for us. Maria stroked her daughter's cheek, her eyes filled with fear and pride. You're so like him. He never ran from a fight either. She sighed. But I'm coming with you. Mom, no, you're injured. I'm not letting you face this alone. We go together or not at all. Helena knew that tone. There was no arguing with her mother when she used it. Fine, but you stay in the taxi while I meet Victor. If anything looks wrong, if I don't come back in 20 minutes, tell the driver to take you to the police station. At 2:45 p.m., their taxi pulled up across from Alcantara Tower, a gleaming skyscraper of glass and steel that dominated the skyline. The cafe where Victor waited was on the corner, its outdoor tables offering a clear view of the tower's main entrance. 20 minutes, Helena reminded her mother. If I'm not back, go straight to the police. Inside the cafe, Helena spotted Victor at a table in the back, nervously checking his watch. He looked up as she approached, relief evident on his face. You came, he said, standing to greet her. I wasn't sure you would. I almost didn't, Helena admitted, sitting across from him, but I need this to end, for my mother's sake as much as mine. Victor nodded. Do you have the recording and the folder? Helena patted her bag. Right here. But before I give them to you, I want to know exactly what's going to happen. How will this help bring Carlos down? Roberto is presenting evidence to the board that Carlos has been laundering money for the Castillo family, using Alcantara subsidiaries. My sources say he's also going to reveal Carlos's connection to Antonio's death. What connection? Roberto told me the Castillos killed Antonio. Victor leaned forward. That's what Roberto believes. But according to my sources, Carlos was there the day Antonio died. He was only 22, just starting in the company, but already ambitious, too ambitious. Helena felt cold all over. Are you saying Carlos was involved in my father's murder? I'm saying he knew about it, maybe even arranged it to curry favor with the Castillos, to prove his worth to them in a way his father never would. The idea that Carlos, who had been almost kind to her after the annulment, could have had a hand in her father's death was almost too much to absorb. Does Roberto know this? If he didn't before, he does now. That's why this board meeting is so crucial. It's not just about saving the company. It's about justice for Antonio. Victor checked his watch. The meeting starts in 15 minutes. We should move closer to the tower, see if we can spot Roberto arriving. They left the cafe and crossed the street to a small plaza opposite the tower's main entrance. A steady stream of executives in dark suits flowed through the revolving doors. "There's Carlos," Victor said, nodding toward a sleek black car that had pulled up to the curb. Carlos Alcantara stepped out, looking impeccable, in a tailored suit, his face betraying no hint of worry or stress. "He doesn't look like a man about to be exposed," Helena observed. "He's good at hiding his feelings, always has been." Victor scanned the arriving cars. No sign of Roberto yet. He should be here by now. Helena felt a growing sense of unease. What if something happened to him? What if Carlos got to him first? That's why your recording is so important. Even if Roberto doesn't make it to the meeting, we have his testimony about Antonio, about the Castillos. Just then, Helena's phone rang. Unknown number again. "Hello? Helena, it's Roberto." His voice sounded weak, strained. "Where are you?" "Near Alcantara Tower. I heard about the board meeting. Are you okay?" "No," Roberto coughed. "Carlos found out what I was planning. He came to the house, we argued. I'm at St. Luke's Hospital. The doctors say I've had a heart attack." "Oh my God, is it serious?" "Serious enough that I won't make the board meeting. Carlos will take control completely now. Unless... What? Unless you go in my place as my proxy. I've already called my lawyer. He'll meet you at the tower with the paperwork and the evidence against Carlos." Helena was stunned. "Me? But why would the board listen to me?" "Because you have my proxy vote, which controls the company, and because you have something I don't, a personal connection to Antonio Diaz. His daughter seeking justice for his murder. That's something even the coldest board member couldn't ignore." Helena looked at Victor, who was watching her intently, obviously trying to piece together her side of the conversation. "I don't know, Roberto. This is a lot to ask." "I know it is. And after everything I've done, I have no right to ask anything of you. But this isn't just about me or Carlos or Alcantara Industries. It's about Antonio, about the truth finally coming out." Helena fingered the locket around her neck. "What would I have to do?" "Meet my lawyer, Edward Phelps, at the south entrance of the tower in 10 minutes. He'll have everything you need. The documents proving Carlos's connection to the Castillos. The evidence about Antonio's murder. Just present it to the board. They'll do the rest." After hanging up, Helena quickly explained the situation to Victor. Here's even better than I hoped," Victor said, his eyes gleaming with excitement. "You presenting the evidence directly to the board. It's perfect. I can't go in with you. Security knows me too well, but I'll be right outside. And your recording will be backup in case Roberto's evidence isn't enough." Helena felt overwhelmed. "I should check on my mother first." "There's no time," Victor insisted. "The meeting starts in 10 minutes. Your mother's safe in the taxi, right?" "Yes, but..." "Then she'll be fine for a little longer. This is our only shot, Helena. Once Carlos takes control of that meeting, it's over." Helena knew he was right. This was her chance to get justice for Antonio, to make Carlos pay for what he'd done, to finally be free of the Alcantara shadow. "Okay, I'll meet Roberto's lawyer at the south entrance." "Good. And Helena?" Victor squeezed her hand. "Be careful. Carlos is cornered now, and that makes him more dangerous than ever." Helena made her way around the tower to the south entrance, a smaller, less conspicuous door used mainly by employees. She checked her watch, 3:05 p.m. The lawyer should be here any minute. She waited, nervously scanning the faces of people entering and leaving the building. By 3:10, there was still no sign of Edward Phelps. Helena tried calling Roberto back, but his phone went straight to voicemail. "This is Roberto, leave a message." "Roberto, it's Helena. I'm at the south entrance, but your lawyer isn't here. The meeting must have started by now. What should I do?" As she ended the call, a sleek, black car pulled up to the curb. The back door opened, and a distinguished older man in a grey suit stepped out carrying a leather briefcase. "Ms. Martinez," he asked, approaching her. "I'm Edward Phelps, Roberto Alcantara's attorney. I apologize for the delay. Traffic was terrible." "The meeting has already started," Helena said anxiously. "We need to hurry. Of course, I have everything here." Phelps patted his briefcase. "Roberto has signed over his proxy vote to you for this meeting only. Along with the evidence against Carlos, it should be more than enough to convince the board." They entered the tower, Phelps using a security card to bypass the main desk. As they rode the elevator to the 50th floor, Helena's heart pounded in her chest. Was she really about to face Carlos and a room full of executives to accuse them of murder and corruption? The elevator doors opened onto a plush reception area. A stern-looking woman sat behind a large desk, eyeing them suspiciously. "May I help you?" she asked. "Edward Phelps and Helena Martinez to see the board," Phelps said confidently. "We're expected." The woman checked her computer. "I don't have you on the schedule, Mr. Phelps." Roberto Alcantara called ahead. "It's a matter of some urgency." After a moment of hesitation, the woman picked up her phone and spoke quietly into it. Then she nodded. "You may go in. They're waiting for you." Phelps led Helena down a hallway to a set of imposing double doors. He paused before opening them. "Ready?" Helena touched her father's locket for courage. "Ready." The boardroom was massive, with a long table surrounded by serious-faced men and women in expensive suits. At the head of the table sat Carlos, who looked up in shock as Helena and Phelps entered. "What is the meaning of this interruption?" he demanded, half rising from his chair. Phelps stepped forward. "Ladies and gentlemen of the board, I am Edward Phelps, legal counsel for Roberto Alcantara. With me is Helena Martinez, to whom Roberto has granted his proxy vote for today's meeting due to his medical emergency." A murmur ran around the table. Carlos's face darkened with anger. "My father has been hospitalized with a heart attack. He is in no condition to grant proxy votes. This is absurd. I have the legal documentation right here," Phelps said, opening his briefcase and distributing copies to each board member. "You'll find everything in order, including Roberto's notarized signature." As the board members reviewed the documents, Carlos glared at Helena. "What game are you playing?" he hissed. "No game," Helena replied, meeting his gaze steadily. "Just the truth. About you, about the Castillos, about my father's murder." Carlos's face paled slightly. "You have no idea what you're talking about." "I think I do, and so does the board, once they see the evidence Roberto has compiled." Phelps cleared his throat. "Mr. Alcantara Sr. has asked Ms. Martinez to present some troubling information he has uncovered regarding certain company dealings. Information that directly relates to the murder of Antonio Diaz 23 years ago." "This is outrageous," Carlos sputtered. "Antonio Diaz was a driver who died in a car accident. His death has nothing to do with this company or this board." "That's not true," Helena said, her voice stronger than she expected. "Antonio Diaz was my father, and he was murdered because he witnessed a meeting between Javier Mendez of the Castillo crime family and corrupt police officials. A meeting arranged by someone in this company." The boardroom fell silent. All eyes were on Helena now. "Mr. Phelps, the evidence, please," she said, holding out her hand. Phelps opened his briefcase wider and removed a thick file which he handed to Helena. She opened it, then froze in confusion. The file was filled with blank papers. She looked up at Phelps, who was now smiling coldly. "What is this?" "Insurance," Phelps replied, stepping back to stand beside Carlos. "Against troublemakers like you." "And Roberto." Helena realized with a sinking feeling that she had been set up. This wasn't Roberto's lawyer. This man worked for Carlos. Carlos chuckled, regaining his composure. "Ladies and gentlemen, I apologize for this theatrical interruption. Ms. Martinez is a disturbed young woman who has been harassing my family since my father unwisely married and quickly divorced her. These wild accusations about murder and crime families are the products of a delusional mind." "That's not true," Helena protested, looking around at the board. A member's skeptical faces. "Roberto called me himself. He told me his lawyer would meet me with evidence." "My father is heavily medicated and confused," Carlos interrupted smoothly. If he called you at all, it was under the influence of powerful drugs. Now Mr. Phelps will escort you out, or I'll be forced to call security." Helena felt trapped, cornered. The fake Phelps moved toward her, reaching for her arm. In desperation, she thought of the recording in her bag, the one she had made of her conversation with Roberto. "Wait," she said, backing away from Phelps. "I have proof. Roberto told me everything this morning, and I recorded it." She pulled out her phone and the small voice recorder. "It's all here. Roberto's confession about Antonio's murder, about the Castillos, about how Carlos has been corrupting the company." Carlos's confident smile faltered slightly. "You're bluffing. That recorder is probably empty, just like the file." "Shall we find out?" Helena challenged, her finger hovering over the play button. Before she could press it, the boardroom doors burst open. 2 security guards entered, followed by Victor Rojas and, to Helena's shock, her mother, Maria. "Sorry to interrupt," Victor announced loudly, holding up a press badge. "Victor Rojas, Global News. I'm here to cover a major breaking story about Alcantara Industries' connections to organized crime and murder." Carlos's face contorted with rage. "How dare you? This is a private meeting. Guards, remove them all." "Before you do that," Maria spoke up, her arm still in a sling, her voice steady despite her ordeal, "you might want to see what's happening downstairs." She held up her phone, showing a live news feed. On the screen, Roberto Alcantara was being wheeled into the Alcantara Tower lobby on a stretcher, surrounded by medical personnel and police officers. "Roberto insisted on coming here, heart attack and all," Maria explained. "He said he couldn't let Carlos win, couldn't let Antonio's murder go unpunished any longer. The police are with him because he's just filed an official statement about the Castillo family's involvement in Antonio's death and about Carlos's role in it." Carlos lunged for the phone, but one of the security guards, looking confused by the unfolding drama, stepped between them. "Ms. Martinez has evidence that corroborates Roberto Alcantara's claims," Victor said, gesturing to Helena's recorder. "Evidence that proves Carlos Alcantara has been working with the Castillo crime family for years, laundering their money through Alcantara subsidiaries, and that he was involved in the cover-up of Antonio Diaz's murder." The boardroom erupted in chaos. Board members demanded explanations. The security guards looked to Carlos for instructions, and the fake Phelps began edging toward the door. In the confusion, Helena pressed play on the recorder. Roberto's weak but clear voice filled the room. "Antonio was killed by the Castillo family. Carlos was there the day Antonio died. He's been making alliances with people I've spent years avoiding, the Castillos, corrupt politicians. He's taking the company in directions I never wanted it to. Go!" Carlos made a desperate lunge for the recorder, but Helena backed away. The security guards, now thoroughly confused about whose orders to follow, did nothing to stop her. "It's over, Carlos," Helena said, feeling a strange calm descend over her. "The truth is out. About you, about the Castillos, about my father. Just..." Then the boardroom doors opened again. Roberto Alcantara was wheeled in by paramedics, an oxygen mask on his face, a police detective at his side. Despite his weakened state, his eyes were clear and determined. "Father," Carlos gasped, his composure finally cracking. "What have you done?" Roberto removed his oxygen mask with a trembling hand. "What I should have done years ago, told the truth." He looked at Helena. "For Antonio, for his daughter." The detective stepped forward. "Carlos Alcantara, we have some questions for you regarding the death of Antonio Diaz in 1992 and your connections to the Castillo family. I'd advise you to come with us voluntarily." Carlos looked wildly around the room, seeking an escape, an ally, anything. But the board members were backing away from him, their faces showing shock and disgust. The fake Phelps had already slipped, out during the commotion. "This isn't over," Carlos snarled, pointing at Helena. "You'll regret this. Both of you will. Take him," Roberto said wearily to the detective, "and check his office, the safe behind the Picasso. That's where he keeps the records of the Castillo transactions." As the detective led Carlos away, the boardroom gradually emptied, leaving only Helena, Maria, Victor, and Roberto. The paramedics hovered nearby, clearly anxious to get their patient back to the hospital. "You should go," Helena told Roberto gently. "You need medical attention." Roberto nodded, his burst of energy fading. "I'm sorry, Helena," For everything. For not protecting Antonio, for deceiving you, for the pain I've caused you and Maria. You did the right thing in the end, Maria said, surprising them all by taking Roberto's hand. Antonio would have appreciated that. The money, Roberto said, looking at Helena. Take it. Use it to build the life you deserve, the life Antonio and Maria should have had. Helena fingered the locket around her neck. I will. But not to run away. To build something here, something good. Maybe the garage Antonio dreamed of opening. Roberto smiled weakly. He would have liked that. As the paramedics wheeled Roberto out, Victor approached Helena. This is going to be the biggest story of my career. The Alcantara empire, the Castillo connection, the decades-old murder finally solved. I couldn't have done it without you. Just make sure you tell the truth about Antonio, Helena said. That he was a good man who died trying to protect the people he loved. I will, Victor promised. His story deserves to be told. Later that evening, Helena and Maria sat in their small apartment. The TV tuned to the news. The Alcantara scandal was the lead story, with footage of Carlos being taken in for questioning and Roberto being returned to the hospital. What happens now? Maria asked, her head resting on Helena's shoulder. Now we start over, Helena said, touching the locket that had become so precious to her. With the truth finally. No more secrets, no more lies. And the money. I think I'll use it to open Antonio's garage like Dad always wanted, a place where he would have been proud to work. Maria smiled through her tears. He would have loved that. And he would have been so proud of you, Helena, so proud of the woman you've become. Outside, the city lights twinkled in the gathering darkness. Helena felt a weight lifting from her shoulders. The journey had been painful, filled with shocking revelations and dangerous moments. But now, with the truth finally exposed, she could begin to build a life that honored Antonio's memory and embodied the dreams he'd had for his family. The locket around her neck seemed lighter now, a connection to her past that would guide her future. And as she held her mother close, Helena knew that whatever challenges lay ahead, she would face them with the same courage and determination that had helped her uncover the secrets of the magnet and of her own heart. 6 months later, Helena stood in the freshly painted garage, surveying the gleaming tools and equipment. The sign above the entrance read, Antonio's Garage, in bold red letters. Below it, a smaller line. Quality service with heart. The grand opening was scheduled for the next day. Maria had baked enough pastries to feed a small army, and Lucia had helped decorate the waiting area with comfortable chairs and cheerful plants. As Helena checked the final details, a sleek wheelchair rolled through the open bay door. Roberto Alcantara, looking frailer but more at peace than she had ever seen him, navigated his way toward her. It's wonderful, he said, gazing around the garage. Antonio would have loved it. Thank you, Helena said simply. Their relationship remained complicated. Not quite friends, definitely not enemies. Roberto had pleaded guilty to lesser charges of financial misconduct in exchange for his testimony against Carlos and the Castillo family. His sentence had been reduced to house arrest due to his health and cooperation. Carlos hadn't been so fortunate. Facing charges of money laundering, obstruction of justice, and conspiracy to commit murder, he was awaiting trial in a federal detention center. Will you come to the opening tomorrow? Helena asked. Roberto nodded. I wouldn't miss it. It's the least I can do for Antonio's daughter. As he turned to leave, Helena touched the locket around her neck, her most treasured possession, her connection to the father she had never known but whose legacy she carried forward every day. The secrets of the magnate had nearly destroyed her. But in uncovering them, she had found something far more valuable than money or power, her true identity, her father's story, and a future built on truth rather than lies. And that, Helena thought as she watched Roberto's wheelchair disappear down the street, was worth more than all the Alcantara millions combined.